Joining us on the podcast today, we've got friend of the show, Steve Warne. How are you doing today, sir?
I am great, Kyle. How are you?
I can't complain. The Sens, they go out and 3-game winning streak. Who'd have thought after the month they just had there?
Yeah, I mean, just when you think you have the Sens figured out, it looked like, they're heading to a place where they might have to make some major changes. And suddenly they go on a 3-game winning streak. Now, Kyle, I'm not sure they were the most convincing of victories. The first two in particular, you give up 49 shots in the Carolina win. And then against Colorado, you gave up 5 goals, but you still found a way to win. The Jersey game was a little better for sure. I think if you compare the three, that would be your award winner, your gold medalist of 3 wins. But I don't think they were by any stretch convincing victories. But you take them. There's no room for description on the score sheet when you've been going like the Sens have been going this year. So all day long, you take that.
Yeah, I don't think they'll be going into the Senators Hall of Fame anytime soon, but they'll take whatever they can get at this point because, as you mentioned, I mean, they've essentially gone from laughing stock of the league in November to suddenly the hottest team in the league since December 2nd. If you just take that small sample size, right, there's some glimmers of hope there. But when you're watching this team, especially over the last 3 games, like what's your impression of them? Do they have the sense that they've kind of figured something out and they're maybe turning a corner? Or is this just a case of, hey, even a blind squirrel finds a nut eventually?
Well, yeah, that's a really tricky one. That's looking into the crystal ball because, like I say, none of the wins were particularly convincing, in my opinion. There were still glitches there. Even the game against the Devils that happened on Monday night, there were a couple of goalposts there that could have made a difference for the Devils, and they had a lot of opportunities. The bottom line is, and we'll use the Devil exercise as well. The top guys stepped up at the right time. And Anton Forsberg has been good in goal. If somebody was going to emerge from this goaltending group, I thought it was going to be Philip Gustafsson, and I still think he's the best of the 3. But right now, Anton Forsberg is providing the kind of goaltending that erases some of the glitchiness. And through most of the year, that wasn't happening. And that glitchiness, it just begets more glitchiness. And the confidence falls. And the guys start hating coming to the rink as one loss piles into another. So getting these victories are absolutely huge right now for this team's confidence. And that would be kind of my synopsis of the last 3 games, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, they're right back in action again tonight against the Islanders. So you've kind of got a battle of 2 teams who have probably been hit the hardest, at least in the early season, via COVID, right? We've had postponements for the Senators, we've had postponements for the Islanders. Do you think, as atrocious as November was, do you think maybe lost in all of this is just the human and the actual health side of it, in the sense that, okay, they were not playing with a full roster for long stretches. They were calling guys up, sending guys down. Like half their AHL team was rostered at one point. So you've got the mismatch of lines, but I mean, there have been athletes in other sports. You look at like Von Miller for the Denver Broncos. When he had COVID, he was saying he could barely even, lift weights because he was just out of breath all the time. Like, do you think that narrative has gotten lost a little bit when people are discussing the struggles that they went through? Because all you hear is, it's a flawed roster and Dorion this or DJ that, right? Like, are we overlooking the fact that there was a massive outbreak of COVID in this dressing room to a degree?
Well, I don't think it's overlooked, but I think that, it can't be dismissed either. Some people will throw things out there, and DJ Smith, to his credit, he doesn't want to come across as that coach that's always serving up excuses. He's mentioned that on a number of occasions. Excuses are for losers. And I don't think you can dismiss that factor. You never really know what's going on fully behind the scenes, guys playing through injury, things going on. I mean, you go back to the early days of this disastrous 4 or 5 years when you had the Hoffman Carlson thing happening in the background, how deep that ran. We don't know exactly, but that obviously wasn't good for business. So certainly there's always, exterior factors that we're not privy to. We know the COVID thing happened. That was clearly stuff we all knew, but we don't know exactly what the effect was with each guy. Was it bothersome? Were they symptomatic? Or did it just basically just suck the energy out of their entire body? And maybe it was a bigger factor. So no, I don't think you can look at COVID and just say, screw that. Look, you mentioned the Islanders, who the Sens are playing tonight. That's a scenario where that's the conference finalist from the last 2 years. And where are they now? They're not, I don't think they're in the playoffs right now, and they're obviously dealing with the same kind of thing that the Sens have. So there's probably something to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Early season struggles for both of them. Islanders are in the basement of their division as well too, and like you say, it'll be interesting to see. Senators have kind of recovered a little bit since their outbreak. Islanders are fresh off that outbreak, so what kind of energy and jump they have in the game tonight. But I mean, if we're going to switch focus to the show around the show here, as is always the case in Ottawa, there's more to it than just the on ice product. And there have been a few headlines that have popped up over the last week or so that wanted to get your take on as well too. So let's start from the top down, and we'll start with Eugene Melnyk himself. So at an ownership level, all of a sudden this week, you've got Friedman, you've got Johnston, you've got a whole bunch of media personalities that are starting to float out there. Little rumors that maybe he's courting some offers to sell the team now that, the Fenway Sports and Entertainment Group has purchased the Penguins. Maybe the NHL is starting to look at some of their other franchises. We've even heard, all right, they're setting the bare minimum of a $750 million access point for their minimum sale. Melnyk bought the team, I think, for like 90 million back in the early 2000s. So real big return on investment there. Do you think there's anything to these rumors, or is this just the same dog and pony show we've heard multiple times with the Melnyk ownership group here?
I wouldn't be surprised if he's kicking the tires on things, and these are credible sources. We're not just talking about, you know, Johnny Lunch Bucket blogger that just decides to, well, I don't like Melnyk, so I'm going to throw this rumor out there. These are credible sources they're coming from. That was actually, it was the Vancouver province where you saw that blurb basically, and he talked about trusted sources, Patrick Johnson. I think that you have to take that seriously. And then if you look at, does that make sense now? On top of that, it kind of does when you factor in Eugene Melnyk is a guy that wants to make money off this franchise. And right now the attendance isn't great. Right now he's been asked to pony up a lot of money over the last couple of years, from Shabbat to White to Kachuk to Batherson to Matt Murray. So there's a lot of expenditures that have popped up here in the last year and a half, with the assumption that, that would pay dividends. And he's just watched this team go through the run it's gone through. He's just watched the attendance numbers have looked like so far in this year. And the COVID factor is probably the biggest reason on that. So, yeah, I mean, and then you can also fire in things maybe we don't even know about. You think about the health factor with Eugene Melnyk. That's always going to be kind of in the back of your mind. I don't think where things are there. So there's a lot of variables in play here, combined with really credible sources where you say, yeah, maybe there is something to it.
Yeah. Well, back from the dead as well, too. You've now got, all of a sudden, the LeBreton deal is starting to take on a little bit of momentum there as well, too. Do you think the two are linked in the sense of, would there ever be a scenario, given some of the bridges he's burned and not enemies, but less than friendly acquaintances he's made at city council there? Do you think there's ever a scenario where a Eugene Melnyk owned team is going to have a downtown arena? Or do you think that the fact that this is popping up again, coinciding with these rumors that there could be a sale coming, that those two are linked, and all of a sudden it's sort of, well, contingent on new ownership coming in, then we'll revisit that LeBreton deal there?
Yeah, I mean, they would seem to go hand in hand if in fact that those reports are accurate, that Melnyk is now taking offers for the team. This would obviously, if he's to expedite any negotiations with the NCC about a LeBreton rink, that makes the whole overall franchise look all the more attractive, because, unless you live in Canada, I think most people are on board with the idea of it would be better downtown. It would be better served down there. So that's certainly, I think, a big factor. But I mean, I look at, it's hard to say with the NCC. They're kind of the ones that came forward with this thing. I think both sides need each other. It makes sense for both sides. I wonder if they'll be able to get that olive branch extended. If Eugene Melnyk is to be the owner of this team for the next 15 years, is it going to make sense? Because I think the bottom line is, if Melnyk is the one that's going to be in charge, I think he's going to want what so many American teams have been granted in the past, and that's effectively taxpayers building a rink for the NHL club. And so that's probably, I think, if Melnyk is the one kind of driving the ship on this thing, and that it's not part of a bigger picture sale picture, I think he's going to want taxpayers, if this thing is to go, to build the thing for him.
Yeah. And there's something to be said too about having, an 18,000 person venue right in the heart of downtown Ottawa, as opposed to an aquarium or some of the other things that have been floated out there. So just from a city standpoint, whether it's Melnyk or someone else, like, as you said, I think we need to get that olive branch extended, and people need to
Aquariums are great though, Kyle. You got to admit, aquariums are great. Now, maybe you go once or twice in your life and you'll love it, but it doesn't seem like the kind of thing you'd regularly go to like you would an NHL game.
Yeah, exactly. There, you can have a little beaver exhibit or something going on in there, and maybe that's what they get known for. But if we
Is that code for something? I got to know. Is that code for something? A beaver? Okay, moving right along.
Yeah. So if we keep going down the totem pole here, and I don't even really know where to slot him in, whether he's above Dorion, whether he's below Dorion, where he fits in. Like Pierre McGuire came in with a lot of pomp and circumstance when he got announced last year. We've now got a bit of a sample size with him involved with the organization, but for the life of me, I still can't really figure out what his role is. Like, many assumed that he was going to be maybe the PR face of the franchise. Dorion has a tendency to sometimes put his foot in his mouth. He's already walked back the rebuild is over comments. Like, we figured with his media savvy, he would probably be out there a little bit more, but he's been a ghost. Like, where do you see him really fitting in? Or is he just sort of that break in case of emergency? If Dorion goes off the rails, he's the GM in waiting.
GM in waiting was the exact term I was going to use. That's what I thought of from the day he got here. And I still feel maybe lesser so than I did the day he got here, but I still feel this club, if it goes sideways and they need to make a change, that Eugene Melnyk's not going to want to pay for a new GM. So if there is to be a replacement for Pierre Dorion, and these last 3 games have certainly calmed the waters, but let's say it goes sideways again, they decide, okay, something's got to be done, then that, I think, is absolutely, in my opinion, Pierre McGuire's role, GM in waiting. And I am a little surprised that he hasn't been more involved, because he is so articulate and eloquent, that he hasn't been more involved in the communications, because at least Pierre Dorion kind of mopped that up suddenly out of the blue. The team wins the game after losing about 13 to 14. All is quiet. People are saying, we want accountability. We want to hear from somebody on this thing. Nothing. And then they finally win a game last week against Carolina. And then all of a sudden, let's have a news conference. We won a game. That was the vibe I got from the whole thing. But Pierre McGuire, I think, I'm a little surprised that he isn't doing a little more of the communications. He said he might be doing some of that. He hasn't done any of that to my knowledge. In fact, I think the only time I've seen him was the fist bump after the Tkachuk signing. I really haven't seen him publicly at all, to be honest. So I do think he's the GM in waiting, though. I do think that if I was to put my money somewhere, who will be the GM of this club by, say, 2023, it will be Pierre McGuire, because I don't feel like he uproots his home life down in Connecticut, move everybody up to Ottawa, unless there's something bigger waiting for him than the job he currently possesses.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, tugging on that thread, like, again, impossible to say. We're not inside his house, so who knows what's going on between his ears there. But is his thought process, maybe I'm using Ottawa as that stepping stone of, I was in the analyst world for a while. My true passion is front office management. I'm going to use this and leverage it for another position. Or do you think that he saw what is going on in Ottawa? He saw the position that was available, and, as you say, is planning for down the line, like he wants it to be here? Or do you think he's just leveraging this into something else with maybe another organization?
No, I think he sees his easiest path to an NHL general manager job. And I worked with Pierre for a long time, and he's really never made any secret that is, something he's always had as a goal. He has popped up in many different media reports about GM vacancies across the league. I don't know how seriously to take those one way or the other, but his name was absolutely out there. And I know something he has always wanted. And, if I'm advising Pierre McGuire, and he wants to pay me to be a consultant, how do I get to be an NHL GM? The path he has chosen here, I think, is bang on. That's exactly what I would have advised. Here's a team that has been scuffling for a while. You're going to roll right in there. This was a Melnyk hire, by the way. This wasn't something that Pierre Dorion orchestrated. So he gets this gig, And absolutely, I think, he's in a GM in waiting kind of a role. And that's kind of been Melnyk's MO when you think about some of the coaching decisions over the years. There's always been that coach in waiting kind of in the wings as an assistant coach. And that's true today, even with Jack Capuano being denied opportunities to interview for head coaching jobs. That wasn't by accident. I think that if something were to happen with DJ Smith, he's got the extension and he's going to get paid, but Jack Capuano will be slid into that role very quickly if they decide to make a coaching change at some stage of the game. So that's kind of the way Melnyk operates. And so I have no doubt it operates that way at the GM position too.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you even just look around the league, the last week, there have been some front offices completely cleared out, right? You look at Vancouver, you look at Montreal, even the Philadelphia coaching staff. So there have been a lot of early season turnover, which you don't always see in the NHL, but seems to be the new norm as far as let's get this back on the tracks as quickly as possible. Do you think that if this were any other NHL team other than the Ottawa Senators, and you can insert your own opinion of Melnyk and his ownership group here, do you think if it was any other ownership group that Pierre Dorion would still be the GM today, given their slow start?
Well, I believe Pierre Dorion and DJ Smith would both be gone. If it were another organization that wasn't concerned about, okay, we got to pay out actual dollars in salary. It doesn't have anything to do with the cap or anything. We have to pay out actual dollars out the door to unload these guys. Well, so be it, I think would be the attitude in other markets. Here, it's always going to be a factor. It was put to me by a friend of mine that one of Melnyk's real weaknesses is looking at those positions as an expense and not so much an investment. Might seem like semantics, but there's some accuracy there. I think a lot of other organizations are willing to invest big dough in those positions, understanding the importance of them. I don't feel like that's necessarily the case here. But the money they are getting now that they're extended, maybe it's a different deal if they both hadn't gotten extended in this past off season. But I think absolutely the exact circumstances, if you put them in many, many other NHL markets, absolutely. Dorion is gone, and there's a good chance DJ Smith is too.
Yeah. Well, I poll people all the time. I like to talk to people about their opinions on Dorion because he's kind of a polarizing figure, at least on, the Sens blogosphere and Twitter sphere and all of that. People are either Dorion truthers and he can do no wrong. And, there's a litany of factors why the team is the way it is. Or it's he should have been given his pink slips, weeks ago. So I'm always curious to get people's perspective on it. If you look at him as a whole, his trade history, not great. His pro scouting, not great. His amateur scouting and his drafting has panned out very well, but how much of that is him versus the Mann brothers being involved? Hard to say there, right? If you look at even just roster construction, some questionable decisions going on there. So in any other industry, when you're falling below 50% of the things you're supposed to be doing well, you're not getting contract extensions. So am I missing something here? Am I being too hard on him? Or is he just in a position where, like we said before, had he not maybe signed these extensions and a certain owner didn't want to pay out severance on top of hiring someone new, am I just not grasping the secret genius that is Pierre Dorion? Or are you in the same boat as well there too?
Yeah, it is tough for sure because it's really difficult. And when you look at both Dorion and DJ Smith in both cases, it's hard to analyze them fully because you've always got the Eugene Melnyk effect. This is an owner that is frugal and he's really involved. At his heart, he's a big hockey fan, and you absolutely know his his fingers are in the pie on this thing. And so it's very difficult to say Pierre Dorion is great, Pierre Dorion is terrible, because you've got that thing hanging over him all the time. Not to call Melnyk a thing, but that circumstance as the thing. It can't be an easy gig. And I look at Dorion, and he's done some good things. From all the things you talked about, the amateur scouting has been pretty decent. There have been more good pro scouting trades than people give them credit for, but there's been more misses, I think. And so I just look at the scenario of what do the last 5 years look like overall. And I mean, this 3-game win streak notwithstanding, it's been a terrible season.
Mhm.
And how much longer do you roll with that? And that's kind of the reason I'm looking at it from a perspective of other teams would have made a change by now. But yeah, it's difficult because the guy is so handcuffed in
Mhm.
almost everything he does. And you go back to, I used to, hang with Roy Malacker a little bit, the old president of the team, and he would tell me some stories about the level of involvement of ownership. Brian Murray's cell phone would not stop during
Mhm.
hockey games. And, it's a difficult job to start with to be a GM in the league, like really hard. If you get the best owner in the world is willing to freely spend, then you factor in what whoever's running the Sens has to deal with. It's triply hard.
Yeah. Well, if we keep going down the pecking order here, eventually we're going to end up with our friend DJ Smith, who I at least want to give him credit because for that stretch where they couldn't string together a win to save their lives, like the organization essentially threw him to the wolves. He was the only one twisting in the wind, having to answer to media all the time. And yeah, we got a lot of the hockeyisms of pucks in deep and we played hard and, tough to play against and all of that, but he was at least out there while some of the others were more than happy to pass the buck there. So when you're looking at him, now that he's been in charge, he's been extended, we've seen some of his philosophies and what he wants out of players. He's obviously loved by the players. There's no doubt about that. But when you look at him from a head coaching perspective, if this is a team that doesn't want to just eke into the playoffs, but genuinely thinks that they can vie for a Stanley Cup down the road, is he the guy to get them there, or is he just the guy right now?
Yeah, it's a disorganized looking team right now in their own end, and there's a lot of the same guys back. And I know we've had the COVID factor, but that's one of the only ways I can measure what a head coach is up to because you don't hear what he's about behind closed doors. He seems like a likable guy. I had a chance to spend about an hour with him on the day he arrived in town. And immediately I go, I get it. I get why the Sens like this guy. He's got that natural charisma. Guys in the Ottawa Valley would love to hang with this guy because he seems like a guy you'd run into at some Valley hotel somewhere, having beer, talking hockey with. He just seems like that kind of Liam McGuire, g'day, how's it going kind of guy. And so there's a lot to like about DJ Smith, but I don't know. I see a team that has looked disorganized and has looked disorganized for a long time. That last month of last season, notwithstanding, this team has to look better than they have. And all, I mean, playing good defense. I mean, that's got to be one of the more easy things in the game. It's all the skill stuff. Like destroying is easy, creating is hard, and that's what defense is, effectively destroying what the other team is trying to do. And too often, it looks like players aren't out there knowing what the game plan is, and it doesn't look like they trust their teammates because they're running out of position, trying to cover up for what the other guy's done. So that's one of the few ways I think as a member of the media or a fan can measure a coach by, because you're not in that room to see what else is going on and seeing how he's handling players and dealing with things. And he's had a good long shot now. And this is not like something new. Again, I understand there's extenuating circumstances. It is a rebuild after all, and he has not been handed the best of cards. And so it's a difficult thing to say, but I really feel like there has to be some level of pointing the finger at coaching right now for not having that defensive zone mopped up. So I would say no right now. I don't look at DJ Smith at this moment as a Stanley Cup winning coach, and that could be partially due to inexperience, but I'm not seeing it right now. What about you?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat here. My whole thing with DJ Smith right now is, again, whether it's hockey, whether it's life, whether it's management, relationships are everything, right? Like, we're not talking about a John Tortorella or an Iron Mike Keenan here who's got pretty much a 3-year shelf life and then he's lost the room because there's only so many buttons he can press and names he can call people. People seem to like him. So he's got that going for him. Where he's going to change for me down the line, and it's either going to result in him getting fired for someone who can get them over the hump, or he's going to morph into that guy, is how does he respond to flexibility and adaptability, right? Like where he's gotten to this point in his career with the things that he already knows, but how can he put into effect things that he's learning from the players, their particular skill sets, the things that he needs to fine tune and adjust based on who's available to him that night, whether it's COVID or who the team has signed. And that's something that he's been pretty rigid in, right? You look at an Eric Branstrom, for example, here. Here's the centerpiece of that Mark Stone deal. And I get it. You know, the analytics or the film or whatever will show you he's better on a certain side of the ice. Well, at a certain point, though, if the player is kicking and screaming, saying, I feel more comfortable on the other side, analytics be damned. Like, flip him over there and see what you've got. Because right now, clearly what you're doing with him isn't working, because Eric Brandstrom is looking like a fringe NHL player on the best of nights, right? But it's the as you said, disorganization, lack of a system, really, like whether it's zone entries or even within their own end, like it seems like they're making a lot of that up on the fly. So getting something in place that when, shit hits the fan, we can default to our system and we know at least where to be and what to expect. That seems to be lacking. So there's something he needs to clean up as well, too. And then just the fact that I get it. You're loyal, but loyal to a fault, probably. Like, you don't need to go out and sign every ex-junior player who played for you with the Windsor Spitfires and then give them the longest leash possible, right? Like, the reliance on those veterans who, if, a young player had have made that same mistake, like a Lassie Thompson goes out there and makes a mistake that a Josh Brown or something like that does, he's going to be glued to the bench instantly, right? Like, he's sending that message to them. Yet, some of the other veteran defenders can be absolute turnstiles out there on a certain night, and there seem to be no repercussions, right? So he needs to be able to fine tune and adapt. And if he's able to do that, sure, maybe he does be the guy that gets them to the promised land. But if he stays the same way he is right now, he is not currently a coach who can take a team deep into the playoffs. So it's up to him, really.
I would agree with all that. And the other angle is the player evaluation factor. You alluded to it there. I think we all, no matter what you're talking about, we tend to gravitate toward people who think and behave the way we do. And that applies to the game of hockey as well. DJ Smith, 20 years ago as a player, he was rugged. He wasn't known for his offense. He was highly touted as a coming out of amateur ranks, but didn't really have a tremendous career. But I think that when you're that kind of player, there's always going to be that little bit of you that appreciates that, someone who's like-minded, who plays the same kind of way. And that's why the Brandstroms, the Zubs, the Thompsons, these guys kind of get lost in the shuffle. And I think player evaluation, I don't know. And he's coming around. I mean, he's been slow to come around. I mean, it's better to be late than never on this stuff, but you'd like to have a guy who immediately sees a player's potential and that you don't miss out potentially on some guys who can really help your team here in 2021, not how the NHL might have looked back in the 1990s. Josh Brown would be a great example of a guy that I'm not seeing what he sees. He was his captain for a Memorial Cup title. So I'm sure there's some level of loyalty that's going on there. Scott Sabourin, I mean, I would like to see better decisions be made on a player evaluation standpoint, making sure the right guys are in the lineup. But at least we are seeing, again, it's been slow, some realization, okay, maybe we should have done this, and okay, we're going to do this now. I think Brandstrom will eventually slide in the top six eventually. Thompson appears to have arrived. Hopefully the Del Zottos and the Metes suddenly fade from view. And even with Tim Stützle, I mean, I've been saying since he got here, these are garbage days for the Ottawa Senators. They're in the midst of a rebuild. Last year didn't mean anything at all. The kid wants to play center. You've invested highly in him with such a high draft pick. He's so skilled. He wants to play center ice. Why wouldn't you at least experiment with that? Mm-hmm. I'm not saying go ahead and anoint him your star center for the next 15 years. But why wouldn't you, in a season that was so terrible last year, at least experiment with that? And DJ Smith did not, not at all. And now finally he's trying it out and everybody's going, wow, what a great thought. What a great idea that was. Where were you last year?
Yeah, well, that's just it. Like last year, this year, this is house money because
Yeah.
I don't care what, the unparalleled success, original timeline and all of that was, and you can factor COVID and all that into it. But like, if this is not a team that's competing for a playoff spot next year, they need to gut everyone in the organization because it's just been a colossal failure. What I think is going to be really, really interesting to see for the long-term futures for McGuire, for Dorion, for DJ is barring a Hamburglar-esque run where they somehow get themselves back into the playoff mix, what moves do they make at the trade deadline? Because if you go back to Dorion's most recent presser, which, we'll put aside the fact that it was an unannounced presser and, there were only certain members of the media invited and whatnot. That's a tale for another night there. But you look at some of the comments he made as far as, oh, well, we're done being sellers with the draft picks. We've gotten enough draft picks over the years and all that. Like, you can never have enough draft picks because then you can use those draft picks to actually trade for roster players if you actually need them down the line. So holding on to people for the sake of holding on to them makes absolutely no sense at this point of the rebuild. So what they do with players like a Josh Brown, like a Delzato, like a Mete, like some of these players who don't fit into the long-term plans for the team at this trade deadline, I think is going to be very telling for how much longer some of the names we've been talking about are in Ottawa in front management positions.
I agree. And when you're talking about the deadline, I think you also need to be looking bigger picture. How many assets and draft picks do you want to actually accumulate? You've got a good chunk. I mean, I didn't ever agreed with Pierre Dorion saying the rebuild was over. I do agree with his new explanation that we feel like we have, all the key pieces in the rebuild. I think, as guys come of age, they should have enough really good young talent. Now it's time to start thinking about, okay, let's insulate them a little bit. And what they've been trying to insulate with is via free agency. Two things wrong with free agency. The Sens don't pay top dollar for them. And number two, they're not the most coveted place for good, really impact restricted or unrestricted free agents to come. So I'm thinking at the deadline more of a case of maybe you're looking at a Ridley Gregg, a player that every NHL GM is excited about right now. And as am I, as Sens fans should be. But how many young center ice do you need? Now you might have Stützle in the mix with Pinto and Norris. What are you going to make Ridley Gregg your fourth line center? How effective is he going to be there exactly? So when you start thinking of the overall asset picture, maybe your first round draft pick this year, these are really, really key pieces that could bring you that veteran insulation that everybody has been clamoring for and has been so disappointed at the level of talent that Pierre Dorion's been able to bring in these last 2 years. Maybe that's how you handle that now, if you do in fact have all the foundational pieces in place.
Yeah, well, it's a good point too. And I mean, Mark Mathot just the other day went on a big rant on his podcast about free agents not wanting to sign in Ottawa just from the optics of even driving into Canada and it's in the middle of nowhere and all of that as a, visiting team and whatnot. Melnyk ownership aside there. But that's going to have to be until Ottawa is back into the heydays of, the early 2000s where they're vying for Eastern Conference finalists every year and President's trophies and going to the Stanley Cup and all that. You're not going to have people buying into, oh, well, they could legitimately win the cup. That's why I want to go there. So you're going to have to look at players who are probably under contract, which is something that, I mean, Dorion hasn't had the greatest success at of pro level trades in the past, but that's something where rather than just holding on to some of the players who don't fit into the long-term plans at the trade deadline for the sake of, well, we'll keep them around rather than accumulating another second round pick or a third round pick or whatever. No, go out and get those picks. And then you look at the other assets that are around the league. Look at like an Arizona right now, who, if you walked up to them and just opened the vault of draft picks for someone like a Clayton Keller, who's an established NHL player, who is the right age to sort of fit into this group, and just wrote them, hey, here's a whole bunch of picks and maybe a prospect, like that's something that you could then target. So saying that, we're not really interested in getting picks. Yeah, I get it. Dorion, you would love to just go out there and pluck a bona fide, number 2 center or right wing or whatever, and just insert them into this lineup. It's probably not going to happen. So you're probably going to have to empty the war chest of high picks and, prospects you've already got in the system to go out there and get someone, because you're not going to have, an Ovechkin as a free agent coming in saying, hey, let me go to Ottawa all of a sudden.
Yeah, and that's going back to Pierre Dorion and how he's handcuffed as GM of this team. His peers around the league, they've got all of these streams, these improvement streams available to them. Pierre Dorion does not, and he has to get creative. And when you look at free agency, the thought about that Mark Mathot brought up, location of rink, I'm sure it's a factor. Weather's a factor, but these are all low on the totem pole. There's the winning factor. They haven't won in a long time. And let's be honest, not just since, that 2017 run was a blip. It was great, but I think people are looking more at the last 15 years. Like since the '07 run to the Cup final, this team has generally been scuffling. There've been little blips, but mostly scuffling. And that's kind of a reputation from a winning standpoint. Am I going to win a championship? If I'm an unrestricted free agent right now, am I going to win a championship going there anytime soon? Not likely, but who knows 5 years from now. But the other two factors are, am I going to be respected? Am I going to be taken care of if I go there? Or am I going to be treated like so many of these UFAs that Ottawa has purged over the last few years? So the reputation of the Sens precedes them, and that makes it tricky. And that's what makes it tricky to be the general manager of the Ottawa Senators. And it's why I have some sympathy for Pierre Dorion. And it's why, I'm friendly with Pierre. I like the guy as a person, but it just feels like, okay, you've been at this since 2016, and it's been scuffling for just too long right now. And it's almost, I reached this point last week of, I think that if I had my druthers, it would be cleaning house time right now. I just felt like, okay, it had reached that stage. It felt like the thing wasn't budging, and it needed some kind of infusion, some kind of change. And of course, at that stage, they go and win 3 in a row. They're perfect since I made that call or that declaration in my own mind. But anyway, it's a difficult thing if you're Pierre Dorion, and certainly they have to get creative to basically insulate this team and get it in the direction it needs to go.
Yeah. Well, we also run the risk as well, too, of almost going to the opposite end of that spectrum. Not just, oh, well, we're not a free agent destination, but you suddenly become a magnet for some of those players who are at the tail end of their careers and go, wow,
Right.
I can get a shot in Ottawa and I can get meaningful playing time. And they'll give me a multi-year deal where no one else will because they need to get to the salary cap floor. And I think we're kind of flirting a little bit dangerously with that. And there needs to be something to signal to the rest of the league that, hey, everyone knows the reputation that how involved Melnyk is and all of that. So that's going to precede them wherever. They need something to shake that up, and going out there and making that splashier deal as far as prospects, picks, whatever it ends up being, because you don't have any rostered players right now who are very sexy names that you want to move, right? You don't want to move a Shabbat or a Kachuk or someone like that who would actually command a decent return on the open market. You want to move some of the players to free up some of those spots for those prospects. So it's going to have to be a matter of, you've only got so many roster spots that you can dress on any given night. All of these prospects you've accumulated over the last 2 or 3 years that everyone's, drooling and can't wait to see so-and-so when they make their debut. Well, there's only going to be so much playing time. And if you just keep extending that, you look at this year, probably going to be another high draft pick. At a certain point, when do those draft picks turn into bona fide NHL mainstays? Because if you just keep kicking the can down the road, you're going to run into a problem of a Shabbat or a Kachuk getting into the later years of their contract and being like, we're no better than when I initially signed this. Like, trade me now. Now I want out of town. So they've got to make a actual rostered improvement, not just we're always building for the future. The future has to arrive someday.
Yeah. And I think about the farm club, for example, a kind of an interesting phenomenon over the last year and a half of prospects kind of giving up on the organization. And this comes with being a last place team, scuffling as they have. The guys down in the minors suddenly they look at what's happening in the NHL. That team is terrible and I can't make it. Pontus Aberg out of the organization. Abramov. Then you had Schlappick. These are all decent. These are all three guys who could be elite American hockey leaguers for you right now, but they're bailing on the organization because it's scuffling the way it has, and they're looking at it, okay, well, I guess there's no place for me in the NHL right now if I can't make that team. If the Sens are playing better, maybe they hang in there a little better, and they don't walk away from the franchise at such an early stage.
Yeah. All right, maybe let's end with this here then. Let's look into our crystal ball. We'll make a couple predictions here and just see, fast forwarding to the January 1st, 2023. So we're now, into midway part of next year. Is Eugene Melnyk, in your mind, still the owner, or does he sell?
I have a feeling he's still the owner,
Okay.
but my wishful thinking would say he is not. But I guess I'm jaded because I've been down this road so many times before. Like you were talking about earlier, we've all heard the rumblings, the rumors, the hopes, but they've always never worked out. So my feeling right now would be, yeah, probably not, as Alfie once said.
Yeah.
I think probably Melnyk is still there. What do you think he's gone this time next year?
Again, it's hard to know whether I'm thinking with my heart or head here when I say this.
See?
But I'm gonna say January 1st, 2023. I think he's gone. I think he just, like you said at the top of the episode, at his heart, yeah, he likes hockey, but he's a businessman, right? And if he's looking at, hey, Pittsburgh got over $900 million for their franchise, that would be 10 times what I bought this team for. Now, Ottawa isn't in the same valuation as them, but rumors are out there. The NHL is setting that floor at $750 million. So you're looking at like a 7 or 8 times return on what you initially invested, and doesn't have a great relationship with the city, with the media, with the fans. Like, at a certain point, there's enough zeros on a check that'll make someone want to walk away from something. Doesn't matter how much they like a sport. So I think someone finally emerges from the woodworks with enough zeros on a check that they pry it away from him.
Yeah, and you heard that interview he did with Bob McCown back in May. He spoke about the billboards and the Melnyk Out campaign, and I don't know if you were able to read between the lines. It sounded like it really did hurt his feelings. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, if the team is scuffling, I'm losing money on the team, and no one seems to like me, my impulse would be, yeah, this isn't as fun being an NHL owner as I thought it might be. So yeah, it's certainly a possibility, but honestly, I thought it would have come well before now.
Yeah. Well, maybe it was just a little bit of those, as Friedman and Johnson were insinuating. Maybe the league played a little bit as far as, let Seattle and their expansion franchise come in first and let them get set up before we start playing musical chairs with ownership here. And maybe that had to settle out. And now that that's established and they're up and running, maybe it is time for some new ownerships to, not just in Ottawa, but even around the league. You'll start seeing some new investors come in there. But Dorion, is he still GM January 1st, 2023?
No, I don't think he is. I honestly think you aren't hiring Pierre McGuire if you aren't already skeptical of where Dorion is headed as the owner of this team. That's why I think he brought Pierre McGuire in. And so, yeah, I feel like it's going to take something pretty special between now and next January for Pierre Dorion to still be the general manager of this team. I know he's got the extension, but again, you've got the built-in replacement here already, who you're not probably going to have to pay much more money. He wants the title and that responsibility and the ego boost, I guess, for lack of a better term, of being a general manager. It's always been a goal. So my answer there is no.
Yeah, I tend to agree as well too. I think we've got from one Pierre to another, because unless Sanderson is the second coming of Jesus himself there, I don't see any miracle fixes coming between now and January. So
they seem to be on the right path. I mean, eventually they should get it, but it's just gonna. I mean, it's about Dorion making the right decisions. It's about, is this the right coach? And is Eugene Melnyk going to let the universe unfold as it should? These are all big questions, and yeah, we're going to find out over the next year or so.
Yeah, I just think it's going to be a narrative shift from, rather than can Dorion rebuild this properly, to between now and January 1st, 2023, it's now, is Dorion the guy to get the pieces needed for us to be a playoff team? So it's not really so much anything that he'll have done or not done between now and then. I just think at a certain point, the fan base can only be told, it's playoffs are down the line. We're going to compete. We're going to compete. Eventually that window to compete's got to be there. And if it's not there, then someone has to take the fall for it.
Yeah. It's tough for us to speculate from the outside. There's no doubt. It sure looks like Dorion is having a hard time identifying the right pieces to come in and support all these great young players and prospects that are on the way. It looks like he's having a hard time identifying it, but it's also possible that, anybody in his role would have a hard time accomplishing that just based on what's going on at the top of the food chain in Ottawa.
Yeah. All right. Last one. So we've done Dorion, we've done Melnyk. We know McGuire is apparently potentially going to slide into that role. What about DJ Smith? Is he still the head coach of the Ottawa Senators?
No, he is not. I think this is another year where the playoffs are not happening. What a prediction there. Let me just write that down. No playoffs this year. Yeah, exactly. So I think that then next year we're going to expect this big spike that they may not be ready to get to. And no, I like I said earlier, I feel like this has been, boy, as I think about this, what I think should happen and what will happen are often two different things when we're talking about this organization.
Yeah.
But I'll go with what I think, based on your question. Will he be the guy? I still say no. I think they end up figuring out, okay, we have better options out there. Even right now, Claude Julien is about to coach at the Spengler Cup for Team Canada. Who among us would not think Claude Julien would be an upgrade with his cajillion games coached, a Stanley Cup ring? He's seen it all, whereas DJ Smith is kind of learning on the job. If you've got all these great young pieces coming together, I'd like to have someone who's been an architect of a Stanley Cup guiding them.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I like him. I want to see the ship get turned around. I think he's a good personality. And like you said, I'd probably love to have a beer with him. But if there's a gun to my head, January 1st, 2023, maybe I'll say he'll be the coach for the rest of that season and then that off season. So the start of the 2023-24 season.
It's your question and you're changing it.
I'm flip-flopping on it here. I can't get it. So as of the parameters, he's still the coach for the first of 2023, but I think he's closely removed afterwards there. So
yeah, nothing would shock me, honestly. I mean, with the Ottawa Senators, it's expect the unexpected.
No.
Every time I think that, okay, this is it, they got to make some changes, and they suddenly get it rolling again. I was thinking that going into the final month last year, how much of this are we going to have to endure? And then they were rocket ships in the final month of the season. And then you think, okay, they're going to same basic group going to come out. They're going to insulate it in the off season. And then they didn't. And then they came out and they weren't any good. And I don't know, it's a tough market to be an NHL analyst in, because again, you just don't know what you're going to get. They're like the box of chocolates in Forrest Gump. You just don't know what you're going to get.
Just when you think you're out, they sucker you back in and pull you right back.
Oh, they've always got me. Yeah. As an Ottawa guy who I grew up in Richmond, Ontario, and I always said to myself, man, it would be amazing to have an NHL team. So just like sex, beer, and pizza, even bad NHL hockey is pretty damn good.
No. Amazing. Well, Steve, we could sit here and talk Sens, NHL, hockey all day long. But for those that are listening who want to tune into any of the 1,000,001 things you've got going on in the world these days, where are the best places to find you?
The two websites, I guess, would be the best place to go. I do a daily podcast, weekday podcast, the Steve Warne Project. So you can check that at stevewproject.com. That's one I do with Jim Jerome, who is my old TSN 1200 morning show partner for about 8 years. And I also have the Sens Nation podcast. So a lot of the same kind of yammering you've heard on this episode of your podcast today. So we invite people to check that out at sensnationhockey.com. And there are other things as well, but I will not bore your listeners with it. That's enough for one sitting. And yeah, great to be on today.
Amazing. Well, we appreciate you having you on, and yeah, we'll see what the Sens have up their sleeves over the next couple of weeks, and whether this winning streak is just another blip, or who knows, maybe they get it up to 4 for the first time in something like 5 years there.
That would be nice. Thanks, Kyle. I appreciate it.